In the silent depths of the Cold War, a mission unlike any other was taking shape. It wasn't about firing torpedoes or sinking enemy ships. This was a mission of silence, secrecy, and unbelievable courage. Deep beneath the icy waters of the Soviet Far East, an American submarine slipped quietly through enemy territory. Every move was risky. One mistake could have meant war. But this operation wasn't designed to attack. Its purpose was far more mysterious. The submarine's goal was to secretly tap into Soviet underwater communication cables and record everything that passed through them. What the crew uncovered would go on to become one of the most daring and least-known spy missions in history. What they discovered shocked the world, and the truth stayed hidden for years. After World War II, the world was divided between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both nations were locked in a fierce struggle for power, not through open warfare, but through influence, technology, and fear. This was the Cold War, a time when every secret mattered and every move was watched. The two sides competed in every possible way, building nuclear weapons, launching space missions, and creating vast spy networks to learn each other's plans. Espionage became the silent battlefield of the era. The Soviets, knowing how closely they were being monitored, used underwater cables to communicate between their naval bases and command centers. These cables carried critical military orders and nuclear information, hidden beneath the waves where no one could intercept them. But American intelligence agencies were determined to find a way to listen. The idea of tapping those cables sounded impossible, yet for the U.S. Navy and the NSA, it became the next great challenge in their secret war against the Soviet Union. In the early 1970s, the tension between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its peak. Both sides were desperate to know what the other was planning, especially when it came to nuclear weapons and submarine movements. The American intelligence community, particularly the National Security Agency and the U.S. Navy, realized that the Soviets had become very careful with how they communicated. Instead of sending radio messages that could be intercepted, the Soviets relied heavily on secure underwater cables that stretched for hundreds of miles beneath the Sea of Okhotsk. These cables connected important naval bases and command centers, carrying top-secret military orders and nuclear coordination messages. For American intelligence, this created both a problem and an opportunity. If they could somehow tap into those underwater cables, they could listen directly to the heart of Soviet military communications. It would mean gaining access to the most protected information in the Soviet Union's defense network. But to do it, a submarine would have to slip into one of the most heavily guarded seas in the world, a place filled with Soviet patrols, listening devices, and radar coverage. The Sea of Okhotsk was officially declared Soviet territorial waters, meaning any foreign intrusion would be seen as a serious act of aggression. Despite the enormous risk, American leaders decided the potential reward was worth it. The U.S. Navy and NSA began planning a mission so secret that only a handful of people would ever know about it. This mission would later be called Operation Ivy Bells. The submarine chosen for the task was the USS Halibut, a vessel that had already proven its reliability. The Halibut had originally been built as a guided missile submarine, but it had been completely redesigned for espionage. Inside its hull were state-of-the-art cameras, sonar systems, and compartments for carrying divers and specialized equipment. It even had long mechanical arms that could be used to work on the seafloor, like the hands of a giant underwater machine. The crew that would take part in this mission were carefully selected and sworn to absolute secrecy. They knew that if anything went wrong, there would be no rescue, no backup, and no way to explain their presence in Soviet waters. Still, they accepted the mission, understanding that what they were about to do could change the course of the Cold War. Operation Ivy Bells was born out of bravery, innovation, and a determination to outthink the enemy in the most silent and dangerous way imaginable. The journey into Soviet waters was one of the most dangerous missions ever attempted by an American submarine crew. The USS Halibut moved silently through the cold, dark depths, its engines running so quietly that even nearby sonar would hear nothing more than a faint whisper. Every crew member on board understood the gravity of what they were doing. They weren't just crossing a line on a map, they were entering the heart of enemy territory, a zone filled with Soviet warships, sonar nets, and underwater microphones built to catch intruders. If they were detected, the Soviets would have seen it as an act of war. There would be no time to explain, no rescue, and no escape. Every decision inside that submarine carried the weight of a potential world war. As the halibut descended deeper into the Sea of Okhotsk, the tension grew. The crew relied on detailed intelligence reports, precise navigation charts, and sonar readings to avoid Soviet patrols. The submarine crept slowly along the seafloor, guided by the hands and eyes of sailors who knew that one wrong move could expose them. Each time the sonar pinged faintly off the ocean bottom, the sound echoed like a heartbeat through the ship. They knew somewhere beneath them lay the secret cable that carried the Soviet Union's most guarded military communications. Finding that cable was like searching for a thread in a black ocean. The sea was vast, the current strong, and visibility often close to zero. But after hours of slow, careful movement, the crew finally located the faint signature of a man-made object, a thin line of metal running along the seafloor. This was the Soviet communication cable, the one that connected their naval bases to command centers far inland. It was the lifeline of the Soviet Navy, and now the Americans were within reach of it. Once the location was confirmed, it was time for the most dangerous part of the operation. Divers prepared to leave the safety of the submarine and step into near-freezing water hundreds of feet below the surface. They wore thick wetsuits and carried specialized tools, moving slowly to avoid stirring up clouds of sand that could give away their position. Each diver knew that even a small equipment malfunction could mean death, yet none hesitated. They exited through a specially built chamber and began their silent work on the ocean floor. Their mission was to attach a recording device, known simply as the tap, to the Soviet cable. The tap was an advanced piece of engineering, a small, waterproof box that could wrap around the cable and record every electrical signal passing through it. It did not break the cable or interrupt communication, which meant the Soviets would have no reason to suspect anything was wrong. Once secured, the tap began its quiet work, capturing hours of Soviet naval communications, conversations, commands, and even personal messages sent between officers. The first mission was a complete success. When the divers returned with the recordings, U.S. analysts were stunned. The information was clear and incredibly valuable. They could hear how Soviet submarines communicated with headquarters, how their fleets coordinated movements, and even how their commanders thought during tense moments. Encouraged by the success, the operation became a regular mission. Every month, the halibut or another submarine would make the same dangerous journey back into Soviet waters. Divers would descend again, retrieve the old recordings, replace them with fresh equipment, and return without leaving a trace. These missions continued for years, each one as secret and dangerous as the last. The crew developed an unspoken rhythm, silent teamwork born of shared danger and absolute trust. They learned to live with the constant pressure of secrecy, the fear of discovery, and the pride of knowing they were part of something extraordinary. Deep beneath the sea, in the quiet darkness where no light reached, a handful of men carried out one of the most successful intelligence-gathering operations in history. They worked in silence, listened in silence, and vanished in silence, leaving behind nothing but the faint hum of the Soviet cable, unaware it was no longer alone. When the first set of recordings from the underwater tap arrived in the United States, intelligence analysts could hardly believe what they were hearing. The quality of the data was astonishing. For years, American intelligence had been trying to understand how the Soviet Navy organized its fleet movements, how it communicated with its submarines, and how it managed its nuclear deterrent. Now all of that information was flowing directly into their hands, captured from the Soviet Union's own secure lines. The voices were clear, the codes were intact, and the details were precise. The United States was listening in on one of the most secret military communication networks in the world. The recordings revealed the everyday heartbeat of the Soviet Navy, could track when submarines left port, where they were headed, and how long they stayed at sea. They could hear conversations between commanders discussing patrol routes and exercises, as well as more sensitive talks about nuclear weapons, readiness, and maintenance. These details painted a picture of how the Soviet Navy operated, how orders were passed from Moscow to individual captains, how information moved up the chain of command, and how much autonomy Soviet officers were allowed to have in critical situations. This was knowledge that military strategists had never been able to access before. Each tape offered a new layer of understanding. Some contained technical data about submarine operations, Others revealed navigation routes and radio procedures, and some even exposed the personal habits of Soviet officers. The U.S. began to build detailed profiles of commanders, learning who followed strict protocol and who took risks. By listening to these communications over months and years, analysts could detect patterns in how the Soviet Navy prepared for large-scale operations or responded to alerts. They could now predict Soviet movements in ways that would have been impossible without this information. In military terms, the results were a breakthrough. The Navy used the intelligence to reposition its submarines and improve anti-submarine tactics. The information helped confirm suspicions about where Soviet missile submarines were hiding and how often they patrolled near U.S. waters. It even revealed the state of Soviet technology, showing which systems worked well and which ones caused problems. For the first time, American strategists could assess the Soviet threat based on hard evidence rather than guesses or satellite photos. Back in Washington, a small circle of officials understood how valuable this source had become. The operation's results were shared only with those who absolutely needed to know. Reports based on the intercepted data were marked with the highest classification, and even senior military officers were unaware of where the information had come from. The mission's success was kept hidden behind layers of secrecy, partly to protect the people involved, but also to make sure the Soviets never realized what had happened beneath their waters. Years passed, and the operation continued smoothly. Every few weeks, the divers from the USS Halibut or another submarine would return to the same place, recover the tapes, and replace them with fresh ones. Each batch of recordings brought a new wave of insight. The United States was now reading Soviet communications as if it were sitting inside their headquarters. Yet on the other side of the world, the Soviets remained completely unaware. Their cables hummed with messages and orders, their admirals spoke freely, and their officers trusted that the deep sea protected their secrets. Operation Ivy Bells had achieved what once seemed impossible. It had turned one of the most heavily guarded parts of the Soviet military into an open book, and it did so without a single shot being fired. For nearly a decade, the United States held an invisible advantage that shaped Cold War strategy at the highest levels. The Soviets had no clue that their private conversations, transmitted through cables they believed to be safe, were being quietly recorded thousands of feet below the surface of their own sea. It was one of the most extraordinary and successful espionage feats in modern history. A victory earned not by strength or violence, but by silence, patience, and the unmatched courage of those who worked in the darkness of the ocean. For years, Operation Ivy Bells had remained an invisible masterpiece of intelligence work. It operated in total secrecy, producing invaluable insights that shaped America's understanding of Soviet power. The mission had survived countless dangers beneath the sea, avoiding radar, sonar, and Soviet patrols. But in the end, it wasn't discovered by enemy ships or satellites. It was undone by one man's betrayal. Ronald Pelton had once been a trusted employee of the National Security Agency. He was intelligent, skilled, and deeply familiar with how America gathered its most sensitive information. But after leaving the agency in the late 1970s, his life began to crumble. He lost his savings, fell into debt, and struggled to find stable work. The skills that once made him valuable to the government became a dangerous temptation when he realized how much his knowledge might be worth to the enemy. Out of desperation and greed, Pelton did something no loyal American would ever consider. He decided to sell his country's secrets to the Soviet Union. In 1980, Pelton walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., pretending to be just another curious visitor. But once inside, he asked to speak with someone from the KGB. He offered to trade classified information in exchange for money. What made him especially dangerous was his deep understanding of highly secret programs, including the underwater surveillance missions conducted by the U.S. Navy in Soviet waters. When Pelton began describing one particular operation that involved tapping Soviet underwater cables, the KGB officers listening to him instantly understood the magnitude of what he was revealing. He didn't know every technical detail, but he knew enough to give them the lead they needed. The KGB took Pelton's information seriously. Within months, Soviet naval intelligence teams began searching the area of the Sea of Okhotsk, the same body of water where the U.S. submarine USS Halibut and others had carried out their covert missions for years. The search was slow and careful. The Soviets knew they were looking for something small but devastatingly important. Then, deep on the seabed, Soviet divers made a shocking discovery. Hidden near one of their main underwater communication cables was a strange object, a sealed metallic structure fitted with electronics and recording systems. The Americans had been listening all along. Asterisk. The realization sent waves of anger and disbelief through the Soviet command. The device had been sitting undetected for nearly a decade, quietly recording every classified conversation sent through their military communication lines. It was a humiliating moment for the Soviet Navy, but also a moment of triumph for the KGB, who now had proof that their suspicions were correct. The Soviets removed the device, studied it, and confirmed that it had been used to spy on their naval operations. The tap was destroyed, and the communication routes it had targeted were permanently altered. The Soviets immediately changed their encryption systems, rerouted communications, and launched security sweeps across their entire undersea network. Back in the United States, the loss was catastrophic. Overnight, one of the most valuable and reliable sources of Soviet intelligence was gone. Decades of effort, the courage of countless submariners, and the ingenuity of engineers had been erased by a single act of betrayal. For the intelligence community, it was a painful reminder that the greatest threat to any secret often comes not from the enemy, but from within. For years, Pelton managed to live quietly, believing he had gotten away with it. He used the money he earned from the Soviets to pay off debts and live modestly, avoiding suspicion. But the CIA and FBI never stopped looking. In 1985, a KGB defector named Vitaly Yurchenko revealed crucial information to the Americans. He mentioned an American who had sold details of a submarine cable tapping operation to the Soviets. The clues led investigators straight to Ronald Pelton. When the FBI finally confronted him, Pelton tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The details he had shared matched classified reports perfectly. During his trial, prosecutors laid out the extent of the damage he had caused, not just the loss of Operation Ivy Bells, but the exposure of other sensitive programs as well. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For American intelligence officers who had worked on Ivy Bells, the betrayal cut deep. The mission had represented the perfect blend of technology, bravery, and secrecy, a silent success story that had kept the peace by keeping America informed. To have it undone by a single man's greed was heartbreaking. It proved that even the most brilliant, the operation could fall apart if just one person decided. To put personal gain above duty and loyalty, Ronald Pelton's betrayal remains one of the darkest chapters in U.S. intelligence history. It ended a mission that had changed the course of the Cold War and reminded everyone in the world of espionage that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a torpedo or a missile, it's betrayal. Operation Ivy Bells remains one of the most daring and mysterious chapters in the long history of the Cold War. Mission that captured the very essence of that tense era, a time when nations fought not with armies on battlefields, but with secrets, intelligence, and invisible operations carried out far from public view. It showed how far both sides were willing to go to gain an edge, and how the line between peace and war could be crossed in silence deep beneath the surface of the sea. The operation demonstrated that true intelligence work wasn't just about decoding messages or analyzing satellite photos from the safety of an office. It required people, real human beings, who were willing to put their lives on the line in the most extreme and unpredictable conditions imaginable. The divers and submariners who took part in Operation Ivy Bells did so knowing that discovery would mean disaster. They operated under constant threat, deep inside Soviet-controlled waters, surrounded by enemy patrols and sonar systems designed to catch intruders. One mistake, one wrong move, could have sparked an international crisis or even a nuclear confrontation. Yet, despite the danger, they continued their work with precision, discipline, and courage. What set this mission apart was its mix of advanced technology and human bravery. The U.S. Navy, engineers, and National Security Agency, specialists who planned it, had to solve problems no one had ever faced before. They had to design a recording device that could survive 4 months in freezing water, withstand immense pressure, and remain completely undetectable. They had to modify submarines so they could carry out the mission quietly, without being detected by Soviet sonar or surveillance systems. And once everything was ready, it all came down to the courage of the divers, men who would exit their submarine hundreds of feet below the surface, guided only by dim lights and their instruments, to attach a recording device to a live Soviet communication cable. Their work changed the understanding of espionage forever. Operation Ivy Bells proved that the oceans themselves could become a battlefield for intelligence gathering. Until then, most espionage took place on land or in the air, through spy planes, listening posts, or human agents. But Ivy Bells showed that beneath the sea lay a whole new world of possibilities. The undersea cables that connected Soviet bases and command centers were as vulnerable as radio signals. And with the right mix of technology and skill, they could be tapped without anyone knowing. The operation opened a new frontier for underwater surveillance that would influence intelligence methods for decades. Despite its eventual exposure, the success of Operation Ivy Bells remained a symbol of what determination, teamwork, and innovation could achieve. The information it provided gave the United States a crucial advantage during some of the most dangerous years of the Cold War. It allowed analysts to understand Soviet naval strategy, track submarine movements, and monitor nuclear communication systems with unmatched accuracy. That intelligence likely prevented misunderstandings and miscalculations that could have escalated into open conflict. In many ways, the mission helped maintain balance in a world always on the edge of war. Even now, much of what happened during Operation Ivy Bells remains a closely guarded secret. The full reports, technical designs, and detailed results of the recordings have never been made public. Only fragments of the story have been revealed through declassified files and the accounts of those who were directly involved. The rest remains buried in the classified archives of U.S. intelligence agencies, perhaps to protect the technology. Or perhaps because the mission's success and eventual betrayal still carry lessons that are too sensitive to share openly. But what we do know is enough to understand its legacy. Operation Ivy Bells stands as a reminder of the extraordinary risks taken by those who served in silence, without recognition or fame. Their courage and skill shaped the course of history in ways few people will ever know. It also serves as a warning about the fragility of secrecy and the price of betrayal. The operation achieved greatness through trust and teamwork. Yet it ended when one man's greed brought everything crashing down. Still, despite that bitter ending, the mission's legacy lives on. It inspired future generations of intelligence officers and engineers to push the limits of what was possible. It taught the world that espionage is not just about technology, but about human resolve, about the quiet bravery of people who operate in darkness so that others can live in light. Operation Ivy Bells will forever remain a symbol of the Cold War's hidden battles, a story of silence, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge in a time when every secret could change the fate of the world. Operation Ivy Bells was one of the most daring and secretive missions of the entire Cold War, a silent drama that unfolded beneath the dark, icy waters of the Soviet Union's most heavily guarded sea. It was a mission built on risk, courage, and precision, carried out by people who knew that one wrong move could start a global catastrophe. These men weren't warriors in the traditional sense. They didn't fight with guns or missiles, but with silence, patience, and technology. Every dive, every mission, and every moment spent near those Soviet cables was a gamble with their lives. Yet, they did it because they understood what was at stake. The intelligence they gathered didn't just provide military insight. It helped prevent misunderstandings that could have escalated into war. The legacy of Operation Ivy Bells stretches far beyond its immediate success. It completely changed how nations thought about surveillance and intelligence. Before Ivy Bells, most of the world believed that underwater cables were untouchable, too deep, too protected, and too hidden for anyone to access. But this mission shattered that belief. It proved that the ocean itself could be a battlefield for secrets, a place where technology and human will could work together to uncover the invisible. The success of Ivy Bells inspired decades of innovation in underwater surveillance systems, submarine engineering, and covert operations, much of which still influences military intelligence today. The courage of those involved can never be overstated. Imagine descending into the freezing black waters of the Sea of Okhotsk, knowing that just above you were Soviet ships and patrols searching for intruders. The crew worked in total silence, trusting their training and equipment as they carried out one of the riskiest operations ever attempted. They knew that if caught, there would be no rescue, no negotiation, and no way back. Still, they went ahead, mission after mission for nearly a decade. Their bravery and discipline stand as a reminder that some of history's greatest victories happen in the shadows, known only to those who lived them. Even though the mission was eventually betrayed and exposed, the impact of Operation Ivy Bells endures. It remains one of the most remarkable examples of Cold War ingenuity, a symbol of how far human determination can go in pursuit of information. The operation also left behind an important lesson, that intelligence work is not just about machines and codes, but about people, their courage, their choices, and sometimes their sacrifices. The story of Ivy Bells is both a triumph and a tragedy. A tale of human achievement intertwined with the ever-present risk of betrayal. Today, many of the details about Operation Ivy Bells are still hidden in classified archives. We know only fragments of the full story, and there's no doubt that some of the most fascinating parts will remain secrets for generations. But what has been revealed is enough to show that this mission was unlike anything else in history. A blend of bravery, science, and secrecy that defined an entire era. And yet, Operation Ivy Bells is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The Cold War was filled with missions like this. Operations so secret that even those involved often knew only a small part of what they were doing. Each mission carried its own story of risk, discovery, and human endurance. Some succeeded, others failed, and many remain completely unknown to this day. Here on Cold War Files, these are the stories we bring to light. We dive into the shadows of history to uncover the truth about the hidden battles that shaped our world. If you were intrigued by the story of Operation Ivy Bells, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. There are countless other secret missions buried beneath decades of silence, and in the next episode of Cold War Files, we'll uncover another one, another forgotten story of courage and espionage from the world's most dangerous era, ***.